According to one UN official, since the start of the Israel-Hamas war, life inside Gaza has become a living hell. Gaza health officials say more than 18,700 Palestinians have been killed, 70% of them women and children. Shelters have been flooded by winter rains. People have resorted to drinking contaminated water. Aid agencies describe children and families roaming the streets, unable to find food and with nowhere to go. After nearly 10 weeks of fighting, the sheer scale of death and suffering in Gaza has finally begun shifting the American approach to Israel and its offensive. This was President Biden speaking to reporters today.
I want them to be focused on how to save civilian lives, not stop going after Hamas, but be more careful.
Privately, Biden is reportedly more pointed. On Tuesday, the president told supporters at a closed-door fundraiser that the indiscriminate bombing in Gaza was beginning to cost Israel support around the world. And today, NBC reports that the White House has told the Israeli government that it wants Israel to end its large-scale ground campaign in Gaza and transition to a more targeted phase of its war against Hamas. Joining me now is my MSNBC colleague, Mehdi Hasan. Mehdi, thank you so much for being here. First, I wonder what you make of the sort of slight discrepancy, but a meaningful one nonetheless, between what Biden is saying publicly and what he's saying privately, and whether sort of the reasoning behind that and the shift in general, what you make of it.
It's a great question, and I think no one quite knows what's going on. I suspect a lot of people around Biden are wondering what's going on, because he's been front and center when it comes to the strategy on Israel. This is not something he's outsourced. From the very beginning of this conflict, he was kind of scribbling his own notes into speeches. He was saying his own things. We know he has a propensity sometimes to gaffe. But what he said at the fundraiser a couple of days ago is fascinating, because on the one hand, he says, Israel's losing support internationally because it's killing so many civilians. He says they're doing indiscriminate bombing, which, by the way, is an admission by the US president that Israel is committing war crimes. That's what indiscriminate bombing is under international humanitarian law. It's a big thing for the president to say. But in those same remarks, Alex, he says, you know, at the end of the day, we're going to protect Israel. That's what we're going to do, no matter what else happens. So there is this real disconnect, not just between, as you point out, what he's saying publicly and privately, but between his words and his actions, because it doesn't matter how critical he gets of Israel. Ultimately, they're getting the weapons they need from us. At the weekend, he bypassed Congress to expedite the sale of tank shells, almost, I believe, 14,000 tank shells. When Donald Trump did that during the Yemen war to Saudi Arabia and bypassed Congress, Democrats were up in arms. This time round, I wish we could see more people saying, hold on, let's have Congress scrutinize this stuff. Let's have the State Department scrutinize whether American weapons are being used in alleged war crimes, because that's against American law, Alex.
Well, and when you talk about the sort of ongoing campaign in Gaza, for lack of a better term, the war, the war crimes potentially, I wonder. I do wonder if you can make sense of the fact that Biden is saying publicly, the White House is saying, we want this all to end in 3 weeks at the end of the war. And then Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, yes. Now this is before we laid out that timeline, America did. He said the war against Hamas would last more than several months, right? Yeah. It feels as if there is a sort of, if not a direct tit for tat, a back and forth here that is not indicative of an Israel that is necessarily listening to America's prescriptions. Do you think that is just sort of Israel paving its own path, or do you think that there is some actual currency to be gained in going up against a Democratic president who's up for re-election in 2024?
Oh, very much so. And Benjamin Netanyahu's own political future is in trouble. He's deeply unpopular in Israel because of the massive security and intelligence failure on his watch. This is the guy who can say to his hard-right constituency, I'm the guy who's standing up to Biden. I'm the guy who's preventing a two-state solution, which the Israeli government is. So he can do that for domestic consumption. Yoav Gallant can say, look, we need more months to, defeat Hamas, which they haven't done yet, but they've killed a lot of innocent people in the process. The problem then becomes, is the U.S. government willing to do anything about it? In a game of chicken with Benjamin Netanyahu is Joe Biden, who keeps telling people, he said at this fundraiser, I disagree with Bibi, but I love the man. He keeps saying, I love the guy. Well, this guy could cost you your presidency, Mr. President. And the question is, what are you going to do about it? Because people think the American president, well, Israel will do its own thing. Let's be real, Alex. The American president, Joe Biden, could end this war, which, as you pointed out, has killed 18,000 people, more than 7,000 kids. He could end that war with a single phone call. We know this because he's done it before. In 2021, when Israel was bombing Gaza, last time around, May 2021, according to Franklin Furr in his biography of Biden, the president rang Netanyahu and said, "We're out of runway. You got to end this." And he did. Ronald Reagan in 1982 famously rang the Israelis, said, "I'm watching a Holocaust on my screens. You've got to stop this." In 20 minutes, the Israelis stopped bombing Beirut. And Reagan said, "I didn't realize I had that power." So American presidents do have this power. The American government does have the power. The question is it willing to use it?
Well, it's a good question to ask, especially because there's some reporting out there that Netanyahu and his, conservative allies in Israel would much rather see a Trump presidency. I mean, not only are potentially America's and Israel's interests not aligned on the sort of moral and ethical quandary in and around Gaza and the death toll there, there's just the basic political reality that it might behoove Netanyahu and his goals to not have Joe Biden in the White House. Do you think that's something the White House recognizes? I mean, it does not seem like it seems like a feature, not a bug here.
I suspect the White House, in terms of the political operation, does recognize that. The question is, does Joe Biden? Biden has this decades-long friendship with Bibi, as I mentioned. He says he loves the guy. He's known him for 50 years. The problem is Netanyahu gets along with Republican presidents. He got on very well with Donald Trump. Democrat presidents have never gotten along well with Netanyahu. Bill Clinton famously came out of a meeting with him and said, who's the superpower here? Obama got insulted, humiliated by Netanyahu over Iran. And now you have Biden here, who could lose the presidential election because of this war. And meanwhile, Netanyahu is like, well, I win either way because I get Trump back and a blank check, according to that reporting in Puck this week.
I do wonder, Mehdi, if you think anybody has an idea about how this will end. I mean, when you hear about what is going on in terms of how Israel is thinking about this, not only the timeline, but the suggestion that they have no interest in a two-state solution, and the reality that there's some research out there that Palestinians are not in full support of Hamas, but their overall support for Hamas has gone up since October 7th. That suggests that Hamas is not going anywhere.
Sadly, the greatest recruiting sergeant for Hamas has been Benjamin Netanyahu in this war in Gaza, just as the greatest recruiting sergeant for al-Qaeda after 9/11 was George Bush and the neocons. We're repeating history in a very awful way. And Joe Biden gets that. He said it recently. Let's not repeat the mistakes we made after 9/11 that he supported. I just wish he would act on those words.
Mehdi Hasan, thank you for being here, my friend. Thank you for your time tonight. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Much more ahead tonight, including more pregnant women suing red states to have an abortion.